what is one of the biggest lessons you took out of your parents' examples to you that you know, when you became a dad, you're like, I'm definitely going to do that for my kids?
Oh, wow. I look at how I felt every time my dad was there at that game. I also think about my mom, who was home most of the time. She's a waitress and homemaker, right? So my mom was there. She was nurturing, but man, did she have an edge. Like, she had an edge to her that was just, I look up to that, because one of the things she used to say to me when I first started education and she was still here, uh, I'd be frustrated with something was going on. She's like, Cam, grace under pressure. Like, don't let it rattle you. You can be rattled, but don't let them know you're rattled. And I'm like, well, how do I do that? Like, I'm losing my cool. And I've been a hothead when I was young. I was a hothead athlete. Like, I just lose my cool like that. And I think that's part of my dad in me. My dad was the same way. But my mom was the balancing factor that said, you can take that and you can harness it. And so when you look at somebody, do they know that you care about them, even if you're angry at them? Because you can care about people even when you're angry or frustrated with them, and you can have grace under pressure. And so when I became a parent, I looked at like my daughter was born first, and I look at this little human being that I am now responsible for. And it was the most incredible experience in my life. I've never felt that attachment of like, this is my responsibility. Of course, when I got married to Kim, that was my responsibility. But guys, can I tell you something that I think I shared it once on my podcast in the last 2 years, and I'll share it with you guys because I trust you, is that I found out that I was going to be a dad for the first time the morning of my wedding. And so Kim and I had been together for 8 years prior. That's a whole nother thing. Don't get her started on that. But 8 years before we got married. But that morning I found out, and I was just like, what an incredible day. Kim and I get to be joined in union. At that point, Kim was not a Christian. I had not been in the church. I stopped going to church and kind of not left my faith, but left church in 2002 after my mom got sick. That's the whole trauma experience. We didn't return to that type of church environment, until my daughter was 5 and came upstairs in a little dress and said, hey, are we going to church today? And I was like shaking with anxiety and said, no, okay, maybe. So there's a period of my life that was kind of off the rails. And I know that when I held Maya for the first time, I knew that I had to have grace under pressure. I needed to be present. I needed to love this little human with everything I had, even when I was angry. And now I had a responsibility to do more than just look out for myself. So, yeah.
It's so beautiful because grace under pressure and dad guilt run such a fine line together. They're kind of interwoven.
Yeah.
And what I tell men is, you can't have, sorry, my cat here, you can't have dad guilt and not care about your kids.
Yeah.
Like, that guilt just tells you care, right. But it should be a motivating driver. Like you said, keep you cognizant of, hey, I've got to be emotionally present with my children as much as I am physically, and I've got to take time to prioritize them. But at the same time, you can't let it eat you up, right? So that's one of the hard things that I struggled with was, I've got to do this. Well, I don't want to do this. I'd rather just be with my kids. Like, I'll be at work and all I want to do is be with my wife and kids at the house. Like, when COVID happened, right? We had to be quarantined in. Like, that was, my wife and I were sitting there on the couch just talking about how this is the most amazing thing. We're getting to be paid to be with our kids. And like, we were thinking, we really need to kind of take and learn from this, because so many people didn't want to be at the house with their kids. Yeah. And I'm like, man, that's the opposite for me. Like, oh, this is all I want. Right. Yeah. But that dad guilt is real, and it's something that we need to acknowledge, but we also need to realize that it comes from a place of loving and caring like a dad should. So
yeah, you wouldn't feel guilt if you didn't care.
Yeah.
Right. If you didn't have the sense of responsibility, you wouldn't feel that. Now, you don't want it to consume you. But let's be honest, being a dad is hard work, man. Like, It is hard work, but it's meaningful work. And I don't mean work as in the definition of work that I would use, that something we do for someone else, other than we do it for our family, we do it for our kids. I mean, just like meaningful purpose, something we can dig into every day. So it's hard, but yeah, that guilt and that caring, they're tied together.
So Cam, speaking of work, there's that fine line as men. We can become workaholics and work 100 hours a week and lose our lives from that. But we also see, and tell me if you agree with this statement, over the past couple of years, I hear all the time, kids don't want to work these days. Now, is that just boomers complaining about the next generation? You always hear that? Or do you think that's true? Do you think work ethic has dropped a little bit, in North Americans over the past few years? And then how do you plan to instill in your children a strong work ethic without steering too far to where all they care about is work and they don't care about their family or their passions?
Oh man, good question. All right. So on the youth in general piece, I have over the last 17 years got to work at all 3 levels of schooling. I worked at middle school for 7.5 years. I worked in an elementary school, which was not my jam, sweaty hands. And then high school for 8 years. And here's what I've learned about kids. Kids are resilient, more resilient than as adults we give them credit for. And as adults, we often look at them through a lens and filter of what we've experienced. And so what works for us, like I said, I'm a guy in my early 40s. What works for me as a 40-plus-year-old man does not work for a youth who's 16 years old in this context. I don't understand their context. I'm so glad that I'm not going to school in this period of time. All of us in this call, we were able to go home and leave it at school. It doesn't happen that way anymore. All the things that we experienced that were like, oh, okay, now I get to go home and leave it there and hang out with the people I want to hang out with. That stuff follows our teenagers everywhere. It's online. It's instant notifications. It's this pressure to keep up. It's the social pecking order based on where my picture's taken on the screen. It's incredible stuff. But it's not that they don't know how to work. It's that they look at us and they're like, wow, you're inefficient.